Have you ever cut into a birthday cake and wondered why chocolate rules the world of desserts? I mean, it's everywhere. 60% of American birthday parties call for it, beating every other flavor combined. But here's the wild part. For thousands of years, chocolate cake literally could not exist. The chemistry wasn't there. The tools weren't invented. And the very idea of baking with chocolate was impossible until one quiet breakthrough changed everything. Hey everyone, welcome to the channel where we dig into the surprising backstories of the foods we can't live without. Today we're exploring the hidden histories behind America's most loved cakes, the ones that show up at every celebration, every potluck, every family gathering. You're about to discover how a simple slice of cake can tell us stories about chemistry, war, marketing wars, and even cultural identity. Stick with me, because these tales are way more interesting than you expect. And by the end, you'll never look at your favorite dessert the same way again. Let's start with the undisputed champion, chocolate cake. Think about it. Before 1764, chocolate wasn't something you baked with. It was a drink. People in Europe and the Americas sipped hot chocolate, but turning it into a solid cake? That just wasn't happening. The processing methods simply didn't exist. Then, in 1828, a Dutch chemist named Conrad von Houten cracked the code. He invented Dutch processed cocoa powder, stripping away the bitterness and making cocoa something you could actually mix into batter without it turning into a weird, grainy mess. Suddenly, modern chocolate cake became possible. But the real magic happens in the bowl. Cocoa powder has a natural acidity. When you add baking soda, that acidity reacts and creates lift, rise, and that beautiful deep dark color we all crave. It's chemistry doing the heavy lifting. Swap out cocoa powder for melted chocolate bars, and you get an entirely different texture. Richer, fudgier, almost like a brownie in cake form. That's why devil's food cake, German chocolate cake, and your basic everyday chocolate layer cake all feel so distinct, even though they share the same star ingredient. One tiny change in how the chocolate is added, and the whole personality of the cake shifts. Fast forward to today, and chocolate cake isn't just popular, it dominates. 60% of birthday requests in the US go straight to chocolate. That's more than vanilla, strawberry, and every other flavor put together. It's the safe choice that somehow never feels boring. Kids love it. Adults crave it, and every bakery from small-town Main Street to big-city patisseries keeps a version on the menu. Yet most of us never stop to think that this dessert we take for granted only became possible less than 200 years ago. Now, if chocolate cake's story is about chemistry finally catching up, red velvet cake's story is about a happy accident that turned into a marketing phenomenon. The red color you see in modern red velvet? That wasn't always from a bottle of food dye. Back in the Depression era, the cake barely looked red at all. It came from a subtle chemical reaction. Natural anthocyanins in cocoa powder would react with the acidic buttermilk and vinegar in the batter, giving it just a faint reddish tint. Most people at the time barely noticed it. Then the Waldorf Astoria in New York claimed they invented the cake, though plenty of Southern bakers still dispute that story. Either way, something shifted in the 1930s and 40s. That's when the Adams Extract Company stepped in. They saw an opportunity and started pushing red food coloring hard. It was a brilliant marketing move. Sell more coloring by making red velvet the must-have cake. Suddenly, recipes called for entire tablespoons of dye to create that vivid, almost shocking red that we recognize today. The original bakers from decades earlier wouldn't even recognize the bright crimson versions we bake now. They'd probably stare at a modern slice and wonder what on earth happened. Red velvet holds a special place in Southern culinary tradition and African American baking culture. It became a symbol of celebration, especially in the South, where family recipes were passed down like heirlooms. And here's another twist. The cream cheese frosting everyone pairs with it today? That didn't become standard until the 1950s. Before then, it was often finished with a simple cooked icing or even served plain. Today's red velvet is basically a chocolate cake dyed dramatic red, but the name and the legend stuck. It's a perfect example of how a tiny chemical reaction plus smart marketing created one of America's most iconic desserts. From red velvet's bold color story, let's move to something that feels completely different on the surface: carrot cake. Because who puts vegetables in dessert and calls it a win? Carrot cake actually started as medieval poverty food. Back when sugar was scarce and crazy expensive, people turned to carrots as a natural sweetener. Carrots are full of moisture and subtle sweetness, so they could stretch a dessert without draining the family budget. Fast forward to World War II, and carrot cake made a huge comeback. Britain's Ministry of Food ran campaigns promoting it as a patriotic pudding. Sugar and fat were rationed, but carrots were plentiful. The government even printed recipes encouraging families to bake them. It was practical, resourceful, and surprisingly delicious. The secret that makes carrot cake actually taste good isn't the carrots themselves, it's the spices. Cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger have to be there. Without those warm spices, you're basically eating sweet vegetable bread. Carrots give the moisture and tenderness, but the spices turn it into something crave-worthy.
And yes, the cream cheese frosting we all expect today only became the standard in the 1960s and 70s here in America. Earlier versions were often served plain or with a light glaze. Over time, carrot cake went from wartime ration substitute to the upscale cafe staple that charges $8 a slice and somehow still feels comforting. What's fascinating is how carrot cake proves that necessity really is the mother of invention. People weren't trying to create a trendy vegetable dessert. They were solving real problems with limited ingredients. And the result stuck around long after the shortages ended because it just works. Now let's talk about a cake that sounds simple but demands serious technique: pound cake. The name tells you everything. The original recipe from 1700s Europe called for 1 pound each of 4 ingredients: butter, sugar, eggs, and flour. That's it. No fancy measurements, no guessing. Traditional pound cake doesn't even use baking powder. The rise comes entirely from the air you beat into the butter and eggs. You have to cream that butter like your life depends on it. Serious arm strength and patience. Southern American bakers later started adding their own twists: lemon zest, almond extract, even cream cheese to make it richer and more interesting. Because of all that butter and sugar, pound cake stays fresh for about a week without going stale. That made it incredibly practical for big families or anyone who needed a dessert that would last. The original formula made absolutely massive cakes, big enough to feed dozens of people, so modern recipes scale it down to about half the size. But the spirit stays the same: simple ingredients, unforgiving technique, and a dense, buttery crumb that feels luxurious. Pound cake proves that sometimes the simplest recipes are the hardest to master. One wrong move with the creaming process and the whole thing falls flat. Yet when you nail it, you get a cake that feels timeless, elegant, and deeply comforting all at once. We've covered chocolate cake's chemistry breakthrough, red velvet's marketing makeover, carrot cake's wartime ingenuity, and pound cake's old-school simplicity. Each one shows how a dessert can reflect the times it was born in, whether that's scientific progress, clever advertising, or making do with what you have during hard times. But we're just getting started. In Part 2, we'll dive into the cakes that feel even more surprising. The ones soaked in 3 kinds of milk until it defies physics, the Hollywood secret recipe that stayed hidden for decades, the boxed mix invention that became a 90s childhood icon, and the Depression-era upside-down cake that turned canned pineapple into a symbol of affordable luxury. There's so much more to uncover about how these everyday desserts carry centuries of stories in every bite. If you're enjoying this journey through cake history as much as I am, drop a like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you don't miss Part 2. I'll see you there. Welcome back. If you caught Part 1, you already know how chocolate cake waited centuries for the right chemistry, how red velvet turned a tiny accident into a Southern legend, why carrot cake rose from wartime rations, and how pound cake proves that simple ingredients demand serious skill. Now we're diving deeper into the cakes that feel even more surprising, the ones that bend rules, hide secrets, and somehow became icons anyway. Let's kick things off with a cake that sounds impossible the first time you hear about it: tres leches. 3 milks, 1 sponge cake, and enough liquid poured on top to make you wonder how it doesn't collapse into a soggy mess. Tres leches is soaked, really soaked, with evaporated milk, condensed milk, and heavy cream or whole milk until it's barely holding together. The origins are hotly debated. Mexico, Nicaragua, and Cuba all claim they created it first.
But here's the twist that almost no one talks about. It might actually owe its massive popularity to a corporate marketing push. In the 1940s and 50s, Nestle ran campaigns across Latin America to sell more canned condensed and evaporated milk. Suddenly, recipes for tres leches started popping up everywhere. What began as a practical way to use shelf-stable pantry staples turned into a cultural staple. The cake defies basic physics. A regular sponge should fall apart under that much liquid, yet somehow it absorbs everything and still holds its shape when you slice it. You have to refrigerate it and serve it cold, usually topped with whipped cream. The first time most Americans try it, they're shocked. It's intentionally soggy, soft, and sweet in a way that goes against everything they think cake is supposed to be. Yet once you get past the texture surprise, it's addictive. Every country insists their version is the original, but the real story might be equal parts tradition and clever advertising disguised as heritage. That's the beauty of tres leches. It's a dessert that feels deeply personal to millions while carrying a quietly corporate origin story. Next up is a Hollywood secret that stayed hidden for 20 full years. Meet chiffon cake, the light, airy, almost magical creation that was born in a Los Angeles kitchen in 1927. A man named Harry Baker invented it. He was a salesman by day and an amateur baker by night, and he guarded that recipe like it was classified information. The Brown Derby, the famous Hollywood restaurant where stars like Clark Gable and Carole Lombard dined, served it exclusively. No one outside that circle knew how it was made. The revolutionary trick? Vegetable oil instead of butter. At the time, that was unheard of. Everyone used butter for richness. Baker swapped it for oil, combined it with the foam cake technique you see in angel food cakes, and created something brand new. Lighter than a butter cake, but richer than angel food. It was the perfect Hollywood dessert, elegant, impressive, and completely unique. For 2 decades, the elite ate it without knowing the secret. Then, in 1947, Baker sold the recipe to General Mills for an undisclosed sum. They published it widely, and America went wild for it. Chiffon cake took off. But here's the part most people don't realize. While it faded from fashion in the United States and started to feel a little old school, it exploded in popularity across Japan, Taiwan, and Southeast Asia. There, it's still trendy today. Light, fluffy, often served with fresh fruit and cream. One quiet invention from a salesman in Los Angeles ended up defining celebration cakes on the other side of the world. From guarded Hollywood secrets to a boxed mix invention that defined an entire generation, let's talk about Funfetti cake. Pillsbury created and trademarked Funfetti in 1989. That means you literally cannot call your cake Funfetti unless you're using their mix. Competitors have to say confetti cake or sprinkle cake. A food scientist at Pillsbury came up with it to go head-to-head with Duncan Hines. The real genius wasn't just tossing sprinkles into batter. It was engineering tiny candy pieces with a special coating that wouldn't bleed color in the oven or melt into a sticky disaster. That took actual research and development, food science at its most playful. Funfetti became the ultimate symbol of 1990s childhood birthday parties. Bright, fun, impossible to dislike. Then something unexpected happened. Millennial nostalgia kicked in during the 2000s and 2010s. Suddenly, small trendy bakeries started reverse engineering the boxed mix, calling their versions authentic Funfetti, and charging $8 a slice for something that originally came from a 99-cent box. It went from mass-market convenience to artisanal nostalgia item. That single boxed mix didn't just sell cakes, it sold a feeling of carefree childhood that people were willing to pay a premium to recapture.
Finally, we arrive at the cake that turned a humble cast-iron skillet and canned fruit into a national obsession: pineapple upside-down cake. The idea of upside-down cakes isn't new. The Romans baked versions sweetened with honey. But the American pineapple upside-down cake exploded in the 1920s, right when canned pineapple became cheap and widely available. Dole and other pineapple companies flooded women's magazines with recipes, pushing the dessert hard from the 1930s through the 1960s. The technique is pure theater. You melt butter and brown sugar in a heavy cast-iron skillet until it caramelizes. Then you arrange pineapple rings and maraschino cherries in pretty patterns, pour cake batter on top, bake it, and flip the whole pan over when it's done. The fruit ends up glistening on top like jewels. During the Great Depression, canned pineapple felt like exotic luxury, something tropical and special that average families could actually afford. It was aspirational eating at its best. The maraschino cherries on top became standard in the 1940s and 50s, adding that bright red pop of color. Corporate marketing turned a simple skillet cake into a Midwest favorite during the country's poorest decade. What started as a clever way to use pantry staples became a symbol of hope and a little bit of glamour when times were tough. So what do all these cakes have in common? Every single one tells a bigger story than just sugar, flour, and eggs. Chocolate cake waited for chemistry to catch up. Red velvet turned a chemical reaction into a marketing triumph. Carrot cake proved necessity creates comfort food. Pound cake showed that simple recipes can be the hardest to master. Tres leches blended corporate push with cultural pride. Chiffon kept its secret in Hollywood before conquering Asia. Funfetti turned sprinkles and science into childhood nostalgia. And pineapple upside-down cake made canned fruit feel like a celebration during the hardest economic times in modern history. These desserts aren't just sweet endings to a meal. They're edible time capsules. They carry the fingerprints of inventors, wars, marketers, immigrants, and everyday home cooks who figured out how to make something beautiful with whatever they had on hand. Next time you slice into a birthday cake or see a familiar dessert at a family gathering, take a second look. There's probably a story baked right into it, full of surprises, clever hacks, and quiet revolutions that made your favorite treat possible. Thanks for joining me on this sweet journey through cake history. If you learned something new, if one of these stories surprised you, drop a comment below and tell me which cake you want to hear more about next. Hit that like button, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video where we uncover even more hidden stories behind the foods we love. Until then, keep baking, keep tasting, and remember, every cake has a past worth knowing. Take care.